You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Hey everybody, this is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast. We are in spooky season, which means I thought of Leanna, Renee, Hieber, and spookiness and a new book, my goodness, coming out at the end of September, talking Gothic history and ghosts. Leanna, welcome back onto the show, and tell us about this new one.
Thank you so much, Ken. I'm so glad to be back with you all. I, along with my co-author, Andrea Janes, have embarked upon my favorite subject, which is Gothic literature. And for America's Most Gothic, Haunted History Stranger Than Fiction, we are examining real history through the lens of Gothic literature, through the lens of Gothic tropes. So for the first book, for A Haunted History of Invisible Women, our first book, we examined women's history and asked the question, how do we talk about women alive and dead? And we utilized different stereotypes and expectations of women through history, and then utilized and then gave examples of ghost lore, specifically of just women ghosts, and how that did or didn't fit into those stereotypes, or maybe how it defied them, or maybe how it withstood them. And for America's Most Gothic, we're kind of doing the same thing in that we're focusing on a lot of women ghosts for America's Most Gothic, because there is a very strong expectation in Gothic literature that there are a lot of female protagonists. However, we're not exclusively. We have a range of different types of folks in our America's Most Gothic cast of characters, as it were. So what we're looking at here is, okay, so here are these real things that happened, and here's our understanding of classic Gothic literature. Are the ways in which this real haunted history defies or fits those exact Gothic stereotypes and tropes? How does that make the real ghost story scarier? How does it amplify it? How does it give us another way to examine it? So it's all of our work kind of goes into three parts: sort of a social discussion, a class and gender and social studies examination. It also will examine real history. I mean, the foundation of real history is what all of our stuff is based on, and respect for the dead in there too. Real history, respect for the dead. Our third part of this is saying and sharing real experiences, whether our own or often reported paranormal happenings at these various locations that in and of themselves are unique historic events. So we love a good story. So we try to find, that's how we chose things. We chose things off of the things that really spoke to us. And then did our deep dives across a bunch of different topics. But I think what I want to make sure that I explain for folks is, what do I mean by Gothic tropes? What do I mean by Gothic literature? Gothic literature started in 1764 with Horace Walpole creating what is thought by literary scholars to be the first Gothic novel. It's called The Castle of Otranto. And then quickly, soon thereafter, it became a relatively popular literary genre throughout the 19th century, and then into the 20th century, and has gained a resurgence in the past few years, which is one of the reasons why Kensington, our publisher, thought, there's a lot of interest in Gothic literature right now, and what that means for our modern era. Let's dive into this. So when I consider what makes something a Gothic, it's not just something that's horror based. It's not just something that is spooky. It has to have a certain amount of elements. And one of the big elements is atmosphere and setting. Setting has to be a character. In a classic Gothic novel like Dracula, the Castle Dracula itself, that castle is a character in and of itself. It feels alive for Jonathan Harker as he is in peril in that particular castle. So many of the great settings in very spooky, very atmospheric fiction and film are utilizing this idea of setting as character. So atmosphere is really, really big in a Gothic. So you kind of have to have that going. You have to have a psychological focus. You have to be in the mindset of the protagonists and the main characters, and their psychological focus, their psychological narrative can very often be very unreliable. You can't always trust your senses in a Gothic setting. And so the psychological focus allows for a real deep dive into what are the anxieties of the current moment. And Gothic literature, Gothic fiction, Gothic art, Gothic film has always had its finger on the pulse of the anxieties of the age in which it is written. And thirdly, you really have to have dread that is propelling the narrative, not necessarily a bunch of action back and forth.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to feel the creepy, slow burn dread. I believe that the engine of the Gothic is dread. So these three particular elements are kind of my three metrics, and we start the introduction with that. This is shorthand. I've been talking about Gothic literature now professionally for over 20 years, and I've been an actor in a bunch of different Gothic pieces. I am a Gothic novelist. My books follow different Gothic tropes when I'm writing fiction. So going into nonfiction with this feels very much like home. But these three particular factors, you can have a lot of subsets. You can have something that's a horror, but not necessarily a Gothic. Because if it's just jump scares and it's just nonstop violence or murder or gore, then that's a splatter house film, and that's not a Gothic, because you have to have these. You have to have the setting as character. You have to have that psychology. You really have to have strong central characters who are driving the narrative. And then you have to have that be this kind of creeping dread. So in some cases, it can also be other subgenres. Gothic can be very malleable. It can be many different types of subgenres in and of itself. It kind of refuses to be completely pinned down, but you really do need to have these elements in play in order for it to be considered a Gothic. And then the eerie stories go from there.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, let's not just call it Gothic. No, I love there was something you said right there, particular about the atmosphere, in as a character, and it's the feel, right? It's the feel, and I think that even pulling into the general tone of doom, right? Not necessarily like jump scare, not necessarily up and down raise, although could have some surprise elements, but
oh yeah,
just like when you feel in there, like you feel doom, like when you read for me it's like Fallout House of Usher, right? Like you're there, you see what's happening, you get the feel, there's cracks in the foundation, you're doomed.
exactly. And that's a great example, because Edgar Allan Poe is a master of Gothic literature. He is our American master of Gothic literature, which is why every single section in the book and our sections of the book follow the course of a Gothic novel. So each section is titled a different thing. Here, I'll share with you a couple of the sections here, so you have a sense of what I mean by that.
Lovely.
Each section begins with a quote from Edgar Allan Poe, because he really does set the stage for this. This is, America's most Gothic. A lot of Gothic literature, the classics are very much European, and that informs the Gothic as a literary form really was a European import. But we begin with a wild and foreboding landscape. So there you've got the setting right there. Part two is a woman on a journey. Very often Gothic literature will focus on women in peril. There's a whole subgenre, those 1980s paperbacks of women running from houses. There's a house in the background. There's a lady in a nightgown running from it. There's your classic Gothic. So we examine that and sort of, we give some stories that play right into that or that kind of defy that. On the third part, the haunted house, because again, setting is character. A haunted house, whether it's a House of Usher, whether it's Manderley from Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, another classic Gothic that was also a very popular novel, continues to be one of the most popular Gothic novels ever written, and brilliantly adapted by Alfred Hitchcock. And in that, it's not really a horror film. It's just deeply unsettling. The heroine is deeply unsettled by being overshadowed by the dead woman who is the namesake of this particular narrative, even though that woman never appears. And she's just looming over the house. That's ongoing dread, and everyone around is kind of creepy, and how they react to the situation. Part 4 is the hidden chamber. There's a lot of secrets in the Gothic. There's a lot of hidden passageways and a place that you think is familiar and that is instantly strange. Part 5 is a mysterious omen. You all very often will have some kind of warning sign, something that is indicating this dread that's propelling the narrative, something that's directly either warning the protagonist to run, or it is signaling something, foreshadowing something that's even more drastic. Part 6, an open crypt, the concept of being buried alive, the idea of something that has been buried coming out from where it has been buried.
Yeah.
All of these things are deep, deep fears that also a lot of the fears that are present in a lot of Gothic literature are also very much present in human anxieties in general. So the Gothic is really, really good at taking the things that people are afraid of and letting us work through them, exorcise and exercise them, much the way in the purpose of a nightmare serves to kind of let your brain work out and test out different situations. That's exactly what Gothic literature does. And then we end with a family cursed, because family curses and those generational curses are very much a part of a lot of Gothic literature. Going back to the first Gothic tale. And of course, see, that's the ghosts again. The ghosts are always.
No, I'm just watching.
They're just it's amazing. So things falling, lights flickering, us having a hard time getting our cameras and our microphones working. It's
Let's
like
tell the listeners about this. We tried one attempt
Seriously.
at this, listeners, and it had a complete shutdown of forces much larger than us. Said, freezing this recording. The heck with it. You're gonna have to go to a different platform.
Yeah, the minute I started talking about the ghosts, this happened. So this is very directly how this works. So you're seeing things happen in real time. So yeah, you get to be part of our personal ghost story here. You just saw it, right? And I didn't even pay the ghost extra for that. I probably should. Tip your ghosts, everybody.
Yes,
tip your servers, tip your ghosts. And so we're all in the service industry. Let's be real. So with all of that, and then we have a sort of a denouement with a story. We have a denouement called The Escape. The idea that because basically we just didn't want to end with like a super, super, super sad story, because these family curse stories are actually really, really tragic. And we're trying to not be too heavy with this to the point where we're not trying to write a slog here, but we are trying to be real about history. And so there are very difficult things in American history, and you can't put your head in the sand about this. It's a violent history. It's a grim history. And if you're not engaging with the horrors of American history, then you don't know anything about your country. And it's not going to make a better country if you pretend that the violent histories, whether it was the horrors and the original sins of slavery, or whether it was the displacement and genocides of the Native American population as westward expansion continued. You have to know these things are part of our history. Do we have to carry around that guilt all the time? No, that's not helping anybody. But what that guilt needs to be doing is reminding you not to repeat those things. And that is something that I, as a historian, as somebody who is a New York City tour guide, who takes people through a beautiful and difficult city, full of all kinds of different stories, we can't run from these histories. So yes, we're dealing with grim stuff, but the great thing about the Gothic literature is it gives us a template for survival. It gives us a template for how to get out of the haunted house, how to figure out your own psychological narrative, and what do you need to do to survive, and what do you need to do to protect those around you? Because it's not just only about you, you're also in community with others.
Yeah. Wow. The escape, the escape there at the end, and when you're talking about the women fleeing, I was picturing those movies in the 80s, a lot of movies and the novels and such. Is there like sticking with the Gothic, there's a question that emerged in my head when you're talking about it reflecting fears and anxieties of a time, right? So here's the piece I'm trying to figure out in my head. Like in my head, I have Gothic conventions being older or more tied with age, or spooky castles, atmosphere, things like that. I think of modern times, and I was thinking about this with the the work in the big city there, New York City, that you do. Is there like let's talking about Gothic right now. Is Gothic transformed now, or the like a modern Gothic, or like is the atmosphere different? You know, like does something fall out of the category? Is there modern Gothic feel, atmosphere, etc.?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And we do there not only are there modern Gothic novelists who are doing great work in the field, reclaiming those classic tropes and doing a completely new spin on it. Very often, and very often it's authors of color that are looking at something that is considered a Gothic or a horror and sort of reclaiming the narrative. I mean, H.P. Lovecraft was famously racist. And so Victor
yeah,
Laval, a Black author, he took Lovecraftian mythos and created the Ballad of Black Tom and really completely turns that narrative on its head.
yeah,
Sylvia Moreno Garcia with Mexican Gothic. She's dealing with a really classic Gothic premise, but she's talking about this from a Latina viewpoint and saying here are these historic tropes when you have these other cultural influences that are
yeah,
there.
yeah,
And the Hacienda by Isabel Cañas, the Hacienda is very much that. Hacienda is the haunted house, you know. So again, the setting is character, and the more that you have different voices in the Gothic, that's also how you can modernize it as well. And when you think about, okay, well, a Gothic setting is not necessarily just one thing. I have a chapter that I wrote about the Dakota building. It's an apartment building in New York City. Yeah, and the exterior was used for Rosemary's Baby, a great Gothic
oh,
film.
yeah, oh yeah,
So, you know, you have setting as character that's so not only is that a famous setting that just instantly fills people with dread when they look at it, it's a beautiful building. It's one of my favorite buildings in the city. I loved writing this chapter. It's also a collection of haunted houses because each one of those apartments has their own ghost story. Not every single one, but a whole lot of them through the years have ghost stories have trickled out through the years from the 19th century onwards. Some of the very first ghost stories from the Dakota building were of Edward Clark, who had been the founder, and that this was his baby, and he died before it was really fully completed. And so he's still watching over the building. He was watching over the building right then, making sure that it was all finished. His ghost was seen everywhere. His photo was in the lobby areas. People knew that was Edward Clark
yeah.
still from beyond the grave watching over specifically workmen making sure that they finished his building correctly. and and so there's all of this very very modern history, whether it was the death of John Lennon just outside that building, whether it is ongoing senses of what people are ascribing to these buildings, um, the disorientation and sometimes the claustrophobia that a big city can provide, is in and of itself its own Gothic tale. New York City can be very overwhelming. That's a psychological thing that really plays in to the psychological focus. Finding your own quiet peace in the city. Every New Yorker has their own stories of what is their spot that they go to feel calm in a bustling and a beautifully bustling world. I love the energy of the city.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah.
trade it for the world, you know. So, but I really do feel that the Gothic can be anywhere. A great example of a modern Gothic is Stranger Things, the show Stranger Things.
Oh
Think about
gosh,
the
yeah,
season in a mall in a like it's a mall that is like disused.
yeah.
Think
I love
about
that.
places that have been abandoned. All
Yeah,
of these modern strip malls,
yeah,
as big chains are closing, and you have these vacant buildings. And for me, an uncanny environment is suburbia. I mean, Tim Burton did that pretty brilliantly with Edward Scissorhands, creating a completely pastel-looking, uncanny, unsettling Gothic environment in which the Gothic is not as much. I mean, yes, Edward Scissorhands is a guy who looks like he's at a goth club, right?
right,
But
right,
that's
right.
not really the Gothic part. The Gothic part is all the creepy cookie cutter pastel houses. That's what scares me.
Yeah,
I'm a goth and I'm like, I don't know about all that pastel stuff. I'm gonna
it's
hang over,
unsettling that those
you
colors are
know?
unsettling, and the
Right,
proportions are
exactly.
unsettling.
So
Yeah,
the point and counterpoint that there's so many great examples of the modern Gothic being point and counterpoint of our modern culture, and um a a, a, a decaying mansion or a decaying department store. Same rules apply. It's uncanny it's there's something unsettling there. You're not sure what's lurking in the corners. And one of the things that is a through line of the Gothic is how wealth and capital will very often destroy people and families, if people are not trying to look out for one another. That the idea that the family curse will continue if you don't look out for yourself and also others. So the idea of surviving a Gothic novel really is in community, because some very often the settings or the wealth and all of that, it won't save you. Only sort of your own holding the candle up to your surroundings and your own wits will save you in the end. And so that's kind of for me an interesting thing when you're talking about ghost lore, because we're still talking about characters, and for us, the as authors, for Andrea and I, we became really attached to these people that we're writing about, and they're very, very real to us.
Yeah. Um, Thank you. Thank you for the example. I was caught up on the setting bit and just thinking about all the variety
Yeah.
of places it shows up. I was thinking to Southern Gothic. I'm hugely Jewish.
Hmm.
I'm originally from Rhode
Hmm.
Island, as you might know, Yankee. But the Southern Gothic, the stuff in Faulkner, the curses,
Yep.
the folks who are there and not there, voices of others.
Yeah. The
Love
the genera the ra- the generational traumas of those who were enslaved there, and that's very difficult history. And when you start talking about that in terms of, Andrea has a really amazing, very powerful chapter about Florida and the plantation ruins there of sugar plantations there. It's extremely powerful. And the North is not exempt from that, because the sugar plantation mills were supplying sugar up north. So, a lot of New York Stock Exchange money was built up into cotton, was built up into various other, a lot of Wall Street was built on blood. And I talk about that when I'm doing a Lower Manhattan tour. So I think, we have to acknowledge these interconnected webs of things, where America has such a rich, different type of biome and foliage and flora and fauna and all these different kinds of settings, in which setting is character. And this isn't a travel guide. We don't get to every single place. There's no way we could do every state. We weren't asked to do that. We were asked to collect some stories that we were really passionate about. And I got a chance, and this time around I got a chance to tell some of my own stories, and I tried, if at all possible, to set my feet down in the place I was writing about. That was not possible everywhere, but Andrea's Florida chapter, that I find particularly powerful, she was she was taking her kid to Disney and was like, I what there is uncanniness about Florida. Let me kind of go find it, and kind of stumbled across this
Yeah.
plantation ruin, and this whole other part of history unfolds to her. And it's, no state or no place is ever one thing. And that, I think, is a beautiful thing about this country, and also something we can always be learning something else about. I mean, as tour guides, we love learning more history and recontextualizing things.
Yeah. There was a piece in your work, obviously, the uh, position of women and the agency of women is really important in history, and the works that you're covering. There was something I was thinking about, like within the realm of the Gothic, like that it is so dependent upon female peril, blood being lost, male aggression, whether
Hmm.
it's visible or invisible. I
Yeah.
just wanted to ask a question about, like, there's so much that you bring out with that. Um, it's speaking again about the modern, and is the Gothic like dependent upon that type of peril? Or do we see some kind of like switching around of danger, like I'm so used to goths music, songs, pictures, novels, everything, and like I have this expectation, not that I want women to be in peril, but they're in peril in the book, and like I'm
Hmm.
drawn to, like, so what's going on with that, like that for now, just as far as from your perspective on, like, say, gender dynamics or how
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the Gothic heroine is a big deal, and it's been at the core of the Gothic history from the beginning. Anne Radcliffe, an incredible 18th century writer who really took the Gothic and ran with it. She was using the Gothic as a way to discuss women's domesticity as very often a trap.
Yeah,
So a lot of times the woman fleeing from that haunted house is also a critique of society trying to keep her stuck in that
gotcha.
sometimes abusive place,
Yeah, yeah,
and or saying this is your place. Well, what if the place is not good? What if the place is trying to kill you? And so I think the Gothic allows for us to talk about these things, and it's not just one gender dynamic. I think it's,
yeah, yeah.
when you look at Gothic literature, you find all kinds of queer dynamics, you find all kinds of different gender identity dynamics, you find all kinds of different class dynamics and racial dynamics that are in play. What is the who has the power is a core question of the Gothic. Who has the power and how is it leveraged?
Gotcha. Yeah,
And sometimes that will be between one marginalized identity and another, but it is very often about the marginalized identity. So the Gothic heroine, as it were, is not necessarily always a woman. Very often it will be who is the most marginalized character and how can they try to survive in a hostile environment.
yeah. I love that. Thanks. Thanks for your answer to that question. I really wanted to to know
Yeah,
your thoughts on it.
yeah.
Just kept popping in my head on like the reliance upon those dynamics, and I think no, I think you're right. There's a lot of fertile ground in there, and a lot for it to change. I think in gender dynamics and queer too, which you could see a lot within some say maybe gothic vampire
Hmm.
traditions. Now, okay, so you're talking about being in place, and when you and I talk, from the last time we talked, a place having an energy, the place holding energy. Now, you talked about within this that you on the spot and in a couple places in your chapter. Can you tell us about the experience of like on the spot there, one of your chapters in what you see experience or your experience there.
Yeah, I was able to share a bunch of weird haunted stuff that happened to me when I was a kid, when I was first a professional. I I worked in a haunted speakeasy in 19 it's a 1930s era haunted speakeasy in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I used to work there for several years before I moved to New York City. I was working in theater out in Minnesota. It's a good theater town in the St. Paul Twin Cities
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
And they were looking for tour guides, and I was really curious about the history of this place. And I thought, oh well, it'd be really cool to work in a haunted speakeasy. That just sounds cool. And it was cool. It was a really neat building. It was in a cave. They'd put a 1920s 30s era wooden ballroom and some stucco finishing into a cave. Used to be
Yeah.
mushroom farming caves in the 19th century, and then they finished it over. And then when liquor became illegal during the Prohibition era, and liquor became illegal, uh, speakeasies cropped up all over the place. Now, on the surface, this was just sort of a place to go dancing on the surface, but
Sure.
it was very much you had to know it was there kind of thing. And they sort of, in the 20s and 30s, by the time that this was actually an illegal nightclub, they were still kind of passing it off as it was still a mushroom farm. But caves are a great place to hold and store liquor and keep it cool between transports. So St. Paul, Minnesota was on the rum running route from Canada down to St. Paul and then over to Chicago, which was the big market. And all of this was under mob control.
Sure.
All of it was mob run. And so there was sort of a culture of violence that it runs through all of the Prohibition era. And in St. Paul, we'd think of St. Paul, Minnesota as like a very, quiet. It is a very quiet, safe town.
Yeah.
Back in the 1920s, 1930s, it was also still a very quiet, safe town on the surface, but below it, completely mob rule. As long as there were not murders or outright, visibly illegal stuff in the city. They had was known as a layover agreement with the corrupt police chief at the time. And his whole deal with the mobsters was like, it's fine if you are here and doing your business, but I don't want to know about it and I don't want to see it. You can't do anything in St. Paul headquarters. And yeah, you can maybe get away with a couple of things in Minneapolis, but we also like that is still it's still too close.
Yeah.
So here inside this haunted cave, and I give people tours through it. And I would set up in 1920s, 1930s period pictures. The ballroom is still there. Really wonderful weighted, like bouncy wooden floor. It has this platform for a dining room, and then there's a back fireplace. And in that back fireplace, there's a bunch of bullet holes from a day that went south during one of the mob disagreements. Now, this was not in the papers, and whoever was between the guns and those bullet holes, that is not something that was reported on. It's not something we could track down. It's not something we could trace as tour guides there. Because again, if it would have become out that there had been a murder in this building, it would have violated the layover agreement, and then everything would have been shut down.
Yeah.
So there's no investigations, and it's thought by the tour guides. We didn't have any other thoughts about how would you deal with this. You buried people in the back caves. That's just what made sense.
Right.
So we believe that there are bodies in the very, very backs of the caves, since a lot of which were forcibly collapsed. So that was sort of the question mark. And as I worked there for a couple of years, the ghost stories would just accrue. I say in the book that it was like creating a bar tab that we would keep adding our ghost stories to. And, and I'm somebody who's always been a believer. I've had weird stuff happen to me since I was a kid. And I try to be a skeptic first because I know how overactive my imagination can be. I know my imagination is very powerful. I am a fiction writer. So I try to separate out what's fact from fiction.
Sure.
And in these cases, we really honestly were just trying to go about our day and just tell the stories of the caves and the history of St. Paul and all this kind of stuff. And inevitably the lights would go out, and we were the only staff working, and the lights would flicker. At this point, this is dating me, of course, this is in the early 2000s, but the sound system was still a 5-disc CD changer, right?
All right.
That thing would start like hissing and moving, almost like an old like record player it would sound. And then you could like hear some big band music playing or whatever, and but then you realized, oh, it's not even plugged in. So you would hear big band music, and I never had the clairaudient hauntings, but even our like boss, the guy who ran this construction company, the owners at the time ran a construction company, and they were using this as an event space and storage space for their construction equipment in the back caves. And then they kept the setting really beautiful to rent it out as an event space. So people would see fedora hatted figures in the mirror, and stuff would get moved all the time. So this was a thing that did happen to me, is that I'd given a private tour, and at the end I'd been tipped a $50 bill. And at the time I was working in theater. I was a starving artist. That's
literally $1 million.
That's $1 million for an actor in 2003. And so I was so grateful. I was almost in tears receiving this tip, because that was going to feed me for 2 weeks of worth of ramen, right?
Yeah.
And so I fold up this $50 bill, I tuck it in my back pocket, and I button the pocket of my dress slacks. And I go to after I see our clients off, I go to pack up everything and put the big beautiful easels away that were holding these period photographs, put everything away, turn off the lights twice because they went back on again after I turned them off. We always had to budget an extra 10 minutes just to turn off the things that the ghosts would turn back on again. Yeah. It just was something you just would do, and it just was part of the job description. And then as I go to grab my coat out of the coat check and put my $50 bill in my wallet, it is not in my back pocket. And I freak out, and I retrace my steps, and I retrace my steps, and I retrace my steps, and it's nowhere to be found. And I'm like, how in the world? I buttoned it in my back pocket. Where in the world? And so at this point, I'm thinking about interactions with ghosts, because at this point, I'm like, I could not have fallen out of my back pocket.
You were so deliberate in placing
it. Was so deliberate. There's no way. And I wasn't like bouncing around as I was doing stuff. There's no way. And I for me, it's an Occam's razor thing. If you've ruled out every other thing, then it has to be, the ghost took my money.
Yep.
And this was also like, these were mob, the boy, we would call them the boys, because we just assume, the folks working in the mob, and someone who's going to be on the other end of this violence there, it was going to be probably young men, and in a deal that must have went south.
The mob
So
ghost nicked you out of 50.
I wasn't going to just let that go.
All right, let's go.
So I stood in the middle of the ballroom, and this moment changed forever how I would interact with spirits, because I thought, all right, I have to communicate, and I have to kind of set my boundaries. And a lot of times with ghost lore, one of the things that I've been, even just like really mundane stuff, talking to people about, they'd had a weird, disturbing thing in their house, and they would just tell the ghost to knock it off. And then generally speaking, if you just tell the ghost to knock it off, unless you're dealing with particularly negative energy, they'll knock it off. So I just said, boys, I know that money was your thing. I know that this was like your trade, and this was just how you lived and literally how you died. I respect that. However, I am a corporeal being, and I need to eat, and I need my $50.
Please.
Boys, I was like, please. And so I made my last pass, and then I allowed the corner of my eye, as I'm walking towards the back of behind the ballroom onto that dining room section, I see something bright laying out, and there is my $50 bill lying flat as if it had never been folded, right below the bullet holes.
You're shitting me.
Right below the bullet holes. I mean, it was very specific. It was very, and it was the strangest thing that I had ever experienced with a tactile item. I've heard weird things, I've seen weird things, but in terms of like something literally pickpocketing me, and I thanked the boys for returning my money. And then I stuck the money that time in my bra, which because I was like, I want to feel this against my skin. And then I realized that was probably actually a little provocative for the boys. But and after that, though, the interesting thing for me about this kind of stuff is I end up being really relational then to whatever spirits are in a place. After that, I started like, I'd be alone. I would be alone packing up. So I just started to kind of talk to the boys about my day. I kind of thinking, gosh, if you are a spirit that's lingering here, and you are kind of a prankster, and you are kind of moving things around, it is pretty clear with how often it happened that there was a desire to be interactive with the living that were there. So I started like talking to the boys.
Yeah.
And that just kind of became a pastime that I really kind of loved. And what it did was it humanized things for me. And now, and because every time that people would be going up to that fireplace, they would just be focused on the violence. And I realized that like they wanted to touch the bullet holes, right? They want, and it was just focused on the violence. And I was like, I reminded people there were young men who didn't come home from a night in the underground here. There was a body between these bullets, and like just driving that home for people so that they wouldn't just fetishize mob violence. That, I know we love stories of stuff. It's like everybody loves the Godfather films, of course. And there's such a mythos about mob violence. Sure. But for me, it was like, can we also humanize the victims of that were doing what they needed to do at a time that was the Great Depression?
Yeah, or they're a day late on their insurance payment, or
any of the, absolutely. A lot of folks who are in a situation like that are in it because they're trapped. Yeah. So that goes exactly like to what you're talking about the person in peril. And in this case, the folks who were under the gun, literally, of mob control paid the price. Those were the people in peril.
Wow. A trip over to the Midwest, right? St. Paul. Oh gosh, that's fascinating. One of the things when I reading your stories and as you told them, one of the pieces I really dig is you got that skepticism. Like you lay it out as like your experience and what you experienced, and I like totally vibe with that too. But I also like the vibe you got being like, even in recognize a place like a place has these things, and sometimes we build it up a little bit more, and sometimes it's right there, and sometimes it's both. It's like part of the human experience.
And very often, actual ghost stories are very mundane, and so most of the ghost stories that happened in the Wabasha Street caves were very simple little things. So you'd see something out of the corner of your eye, the shadows would move and there was no one there. Glassware would be not where you put it, the lights would flicker. Small mundane things. Those in and of themselves don't make for an elaborate story. I'm kind of grateful that the boys took my money because that made for a good story. But that was one thing that happened in years of working there. And it didn't happen again, actually, because now then I started talking to the boys more. And so because of that, there was actually less trying to get my attention by flickering the lights or moving our big pictures, turning them upside down, just knocking them over, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Stuff like my,
I gotta,
this thing falling over, that
yeah.
stuff.
We were telling the listeners before there's stuff happening in the background. I'm gonna rewind the video to talk about me. I'm gonna rewind the video and see.
Absolutely.
And see, there's no cats over there. Something.
No, I don't have a cat. I'm allergic.
That's what I'm thinking. So, anyways, I just love this stuff. So, you got the book coming out during creepy season, which I think nowadays for me is like one of the things I noticed culturally, and tell me if you've seen this as well, is I noticed like around the pandemic, man, people stretching out that Halloween period from like September and October. There's been more of a like diving into post-summer horror, gothic. I don't know, it's like some type of like horror cozy core that seems to start earlier nowadays. Do you have that feel? Like,
Oh, it's true. It's true.
What's going on with that?
I think because it's like there's a lot that society doesn't let us talk about very easily. I mean, I think folks were forced to move on and act like a pandemic didn't happen and act like millions of people didn't die or get sick.
Yeah.
And I think that the desire, I understand this, that some people just don't want to talk about it, but we can't act like it didn't happen. That's not healthy.
Yeah.
It's not healthy to not have a grieving period. And it's not healthy to act like scary things don't happen. So I think a certain amount of making spooky season be kind of fun and or cute and or okay, let's think of the veil between the living and the dead as something that can be conversational.
Yeah.
That helps make a very difficult thing more palatable. And so horror and ghost lore is a way for people to grapple with their own mortality in a safe way. That's the purpose of watching a horror film is to grapple with something really scary because we are as humans we're a little bit thrill seekers. There is an element in our entire being that is sometimes titillated by and drawn to the idea of danger that's inherent in human experience. And in the way to do that safely is through horror, is through fiction. The thing about ghost lore that blurs that line is that ghosts are of us. We could become them. They're the closest paranormal creature to our actual beings. And just about everybody has a ghost story or knows someone that does. Even the most confirmed skeptics will be like, yeah, I don't believe in all this stuff. But there's this one thing and my grandpa said a thing and I believe him. And he wasn't, he wasn't a guy that would, would make that up. And we don't have those kinds of things about any other paranormal experience. It's just ghost lore. That's like, it's so prevalent that something in there has to be real. Sifting through it is, for me, whether it is real or it isn't real, is less important than what does this story tell us about the living and the person who passed. Yeah. What is it telling us about how are the dead teaching us how to live? That for me is relational. And so I think
history and everything.
Yeah. And I think we're in a period where, I've seen a bunch of different types of articles out about people are living in more and more isolation. Now, certainly that was true during the height of pandemic, but folks haven't necessarily recovered from that. No. And friends of mine who are dealing with myriad different kinds of disabilities or who are extremely immunocompromised, because, COVID is still out there. It's still a thing. We can't pretend it's not happening. No. I just got my booster the other day. So they don't feel always safe to be out. So there is a period for different types of people, whether it's financially, whether it's health-wise, whether it's people can't afford to go out because the cost of living has gone up so much. There is increasing isolation. For a lot of teenagers, it's like there's no place for these teens to go hang out because people don't want to create a safe space for teenagers anymore. That, a lot of public spaces, will not create spaces for teens and actively be kind of hostile about it. So in all of that isolation, that creates a need for it, there's a disconnect there. And I think sometimes these spooky stories can kind of speak to that unsettling nature of our increasing isolation. Yes, the digital age can bring us closer together, and I'm so glad we do things like Zoom and all these things, but there's still very often a screen that's leading a lot of our interactions. Algorithms are driving what people see, not human interaction. And that to me is also uncanny. And that to me is also sometimes a horror story, a horror premise, as the show Black Mirror has very often made quite frighteningly real.
Yeah, I find that no, I think just talking about maybe like what's underneath gothic and horror. I think of a pandemic. I think of like mass death and things like that. And I found that there was something, even prompting the question about, are we like extending our curiosity socially into the macabre or the gothic in the fall as a way to deal with recent mass death and or being scared, anxiety type of things. Like it seems like I have a feeling that people kind of settle into that space more, which isn't in and of itself of that bad, because I've had been influenced like in the past. I think like, all right, so we can talk about this, right? So like I'm younger, I'm a kid who loves like ghosts and all the spooky stuff that makes you weird, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
like you're interested in that, and there's a period where like I think socially like maybe as like a moral thing, you think things are wrong or good or it's psychologically healthy or otherwise. But for me, the macabre and the gothic and everything has always been just an endless source of fascination, a way of the expression of morbid curiosity curing the blues, right? Like these heavy
Yes.
things are around us. Let me go and explore and see. So I've always loved that space. And I find to this day, just that little ick feeling people get when you drop down into this type of stuff where, you know, maybe don't bring it up or it's weird or how much time you're going to spend on it. It's still this great well of fascination to me, and even on the points that you do with like of what it says to us about today and socially, the gothic, right, like of the dangers faced by workers, and so
Mhm.
I part of the reason I really love chatting with you and talking about this is because it's like, for me it's not negative, it's not a moral piece of it, it's not like a kind of disaffected brain. It's like,
Mm.
holy shit, we die. Holy shit, people go missing. Holy
Yeah.
shit, like I feel good and unsettled in the fog and in the light. I feel comfortable but uncomfortable at the same time. It's all of that.
It's all, and what this allows us is to be real.
Yeah,
Acting like bad things never happen
yeah,
is not realistic.
yeah.
It's not realistic. So these types of things, what I love, being a goth, and I am also a goth. I self-identify as a goth.
I do
That's a
too.
subculture.
We could have got that
Yeah,
episode. Yeah,
see, that's a subculture for those who just to sort of separate these things out. Gothic as an architectural style or as a literary style, that is a separate thing. Very often we'll find goths who really also like Gothic architecture and also really like Gothic literature. I
that's
am
so
one of those
true.
people. But goths who usually will dress all in black, who listen to Gothic music, who will have a certain interest in these more morbid topics. And for me, being a goth was the best thing that happened to my mental health because I was letting myself explore the darker, sometimes depressive angles as I was
Yep.
battling with my own depression. And Edgar Allan Poe, famous, gothic icon and goth icon also. He was usually always dressed in black too. That was an exercise for him too. He was exorcising some of thoughts and anxieties through that. He was fascinated by human culture, but there's so much more to him than just his scary stories. He was also doing theater criticism. He was doing literary criticism. He was examining every aspect of life. He was writing science fiction. He was writing fantasy. He was writing all these different kinds of genres. He
Yep.
became most famous for his scary stuff because I think that is some of his best work. But but here's a guy who really understood the enormity of the human condition. And I think that that is what the Gothic can allow for us, is that it lets us acknowledge that things are unsettling. And in letting us acknowledge that is the reality. And pretending that that doesn't happen, for me, is what is most uncomfortable. So for me, I'm most comfortable in a Gothic setting because it's acknowledging that our perceptions are going to change, our settings are going to change, and we're going to have to continue to be aware of our surroundings. I think that Gothic literature prepares you to be a pretty well adjusted person. You just have to be careful you don't get paranoid, because there's a lot of paranoia in the Gothic, like don't get paranoid, but let the Gothic like really teach you about your surroundings and about what can you do for yourself and those around you. How can you all escape the haunted house? How can you like grab the hand of the person next to you and be like, let's get out of this. And that to me is how you kind of solve a Gothic novel, because a lot of times in a Gothic situation and in some of the stories that we see here, the most miserable stories are in isolation. And it really is kind of like, I feel like both literature and also just human survival is saying we can't really do all of this alone. And we shouldn't be doing all of this alone. We also should be acknowledging that life is full of ups and downs. And so this literature is just kind of, and these stories and this ghost lore, it can provide the necessary warnings. I have another story about something that specifically happened to me about a ghost of a motorcycle ghost, and having seen this ethereal light, that changed how I drive, because I thought that I can't explain. I was in the car with 4 other people. We saw this. It's a pretty known. I thought it was completely urban legend. So we didn't really even take it seriously. We're like, all right, we go to this one spot in the road and you flash your lights 3 times and you're gonna see the motorcycle ghost. A light, really honest to God, showed up.
Wow.
And it was the weirdest thing, or all of us are like, are you seeing this? And we're looking around at like, is someone fooling us? Is there somebody who just waits at the house at the top of the road and just waits for, teenage assholes to like go and like do this?
Yeah.
And there was nothing that could have made that light. It dissipated right as it passed the car. But as it passed the car, it dissipated, yes. But if it had continued at that same speed, as it passed the car, there was this loud crash on the top of our roof. And my God, did we scream? I've never been so scared in my life by something that was so unreal. It sounded like a car wreck on the top of her car. And my friend, the driver, like peeled out of there in her red Jeep, and we were in the middle of nowhere in Southern Ohio, where I grew up. And we drove to a parking lot and we got out and we looked at the roof. Something that loud had to have made a dent, a scratch. Nothing on the roof. Nothing on the roof. And none of us knew what to make of it. And even years later, I still don't know. I can't explain that. But what it did do was, I was like, that was a warning to be careful on the road. And I think about it every single time I go down a big hill, or every single time I turn around a sharp curve. I was like,
heck yeah.
The motorcycle ghost was warning me to be careful. And I think that ghost in the book is like making me a better driver. And I've been thinking about that a lot because I'm on the road a lot for work and for this book tour. I'm going to be on the road all the time. And the wayside ghosts and the roadside ghosts, all of that is my warning, to always be vigilant, especially in an era of increased distractions.
I love that. I mean, you modify your behavior, and I think there's a great wonder of, whether you avoided something there that was building up, or any of.
I'd like to think of it, because otherwise I'm just scared. Like, you got to use that, because otherwise, what's the point? You got to use something that terrifies you. Otherwise, it just terrifies you. And for me, I can't move on from something scary unless I figure out what do I do with that? Because I don't want something to just sit in a fear place. I want to be able to work that out.
More ghost stories. Love it, Leanna. America's most gothic haunted history, stranger than fiction, by you and Andrea Janes. Tell us. We have it coming out September 30th. And folks listening to this, there should be right on time or right around the time of the release of this, September 30th, 2025. Tell us a little bit about the book tour. Tell us about how this thing's going to go into the world, and your hopes and dreams for it.
Well, we really appreciate everyone's support. everyone who orders, especially ordering a book on its first week's sales are
Yes.
particularly helpful for publishing in general. In traditional publishing, those first week sales measure a lot of how the publishing house will continue to support the title. And reviews, online reviews. If you enjoy the book, leaving a review on whatever your favorite retailer is, we would love it if you'd go to support your local independent bookstores. Independent bookstores have been really, really great about supporting our nonfiction work. Supporting them, you're supporting a local store, keeping their business alive, and also that's a particular help of us too. And also go to your local library. If your library doesn't have a copy on the shelf, if you request it from your local library, libraries buy books. So
Yeah.
you get to read the book for free, and that library is buying a copy that's supporting us. Just the way in which libraries support and academic institutions have supported our nonfiction has been particularly wonderful. So, the book is in hardcover. It's going to be out in digital. It's also going to be an audiobook with Andrea and I narrating each of our
Hey,
chapters.
both of
So
you?
you get, yeah, we narrate
Yeah.
each of our chapters. So because it's all in first person, Andrea has her own chapters. I have my own chapters. The only thing we co-wrote was the introduction.
Heck yeah.
Everything else is our own personal experiences and our own personal pet projects. And because it is first person, we're like, this is what happened to me, or this is what fascinates me.
Love it.
And so we dive into all of those things. And so I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff around the East Coast. Now we're launching in New York City. So we have two events, both her and I together. We launch at the Astoria Bookshop in Queens. And then the next, that's on September 30th. And October 1st, we are at Word in Brooklyn. And then I go on the East Coast to Massachusetts, to Rhode Island. And then I'm going to swing down to Ohio, to my hometown, because I have a ghost story about Helen Peabody, President Helen Peabody, who was the women's college president at Miami University before the women's seminary became part of Miami University in the 1970s. So it's a Victorian, stern sort of headmistress spirit that's watching over the flock there at Miami. So I get to go back to my alma mater and tell ghost stories there, which is really fun. And then I'm going to head up to going to be in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with an event with a Haunted Mitten podcast. So we've got a bunch of stuff. I'm going to have on my website. I'm going to have a tour calendar, but I will be several times in Massachusetts because I have several Massachusetts chapters. I was working in Massachusetts for quite a bit during the time I was writing the book, and what we were talking about earlier. If we have time, I can tell you a little bit about the Bloody Pit, because there's
yes, you have to tell me about that.
There's a particular story there that really, really, really struck me. And this is where it gets into some of the plight of a lot of times the person in peril in a Gothic tale is the person who has the least amount of power. And in this particular case, so there was a tunnel excavation that was nicknamed the Bloody Pit. And I can't make this up. I mean, that was historically what it was called.
Bloody
It
Pit.
sounds like an Edgar Allan Poe story. It was being built right after Poe died, actually. So it's being built through the 1850s.
Yeah.
And it was built at the Hoosac Tunnel. So Hoosac, the Hoosac Tunnel. And it was called the Bloody Pit because just people died building it. And that's the thing. Mine excavation, whether it's coal mines or whether it's excavating tunnels, New York City building the Brooklyn Bridge was incredibly deadly, going down below the surface of the river to lay the foundations, any of these kinds of things. Any of this work is deeply, deeply, profoundly dangerous. And there were no worker safety protections in the 19th century because we did not have our modern labor laws until the 20th century. And we have a great discussion about that on our other. The last time we talked about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire of 1911, which set our modern labor laws.
Yeah.
But before this, there were striking workers. So the Hoosac Tunnel was the first tunnel to utilize nitroglycerin explosives to excavate the tunnel. And that first explosive, the guy who set the charge set it too early, and his coworkers, his colleagues, died under falling rubble in that explosion.
Yeah.
The guy who set the charge himself died about a year later under mysterious circumstances. No one was ever found for that. He was found dead at the site of where his colleagues had died. And everyone in that tunnel said it was the ghosts of those who had fallen under that early charge, explosive charge, that were wreaking their revenge. And so this was all contemporary. Like this tunnel was immediately haunted upon the first rock strike, basically.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, the interesting thing that we can take away from this, and the thing that I think is the takeaway, is what I said about the Triangle Fire. The only reason to tell these stories and talk about the sort of this psychic imprint that these tragedies leave on these spaces is because it's a reminder for us not to take our labor laws for granted.
Yeah.
It's a reminder to not let things like unionization be undermined, because those unions are there to protect the workers as a group, because the foremen and the managers and the owners and all of that, they're looking at profit margin, and the people, the workers, are just a part of that margin. They're not humanizing them. And we're seeing this increasingly in our modern workplaces. So that's not something that's just of the past. That's happening right now in the people versus profits situation that's happening in just about every single industry. So here are these workers that are working these very dangerous conditions, not only to excavate the rock, and they're creating a tunnel that's going to join New York State, upper New York State, mid upstate New York with Western Massachusetts, to connect all of the industrial centers of the East Coast further along the coastline, in with central New York, and across the Erie Canal down into the Midwest and on. So it's this enormous commerce corridor that this particular railway between this just only like 2-mile section, and it is still used as an active freight line today. It is still an active railway through the Hoosac Tunnel. And in addition to the nitroglycerin, there also is naphtha gas that was being released, underground gas that was being released as the excavation was continuing.
Yeah.
And there was a naphtha gas explosion, and one of the rigs that was meant to pump out water, because there's groundwater there too, immense groundwater, there was an explosion. A bunch of things happened in the same case that, like, everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong in the case of the Triangle Fire. Same thing happened with this naphtha gas explosion in the 1850s, and it not only did it create a rising water scenario for the workers who were trapped down below, but the naphtha gas suffocated them before they could even rise to the surface.
Wow.
And someone was lowered down to try to check the situation, and he himself almost died from gas fume exposure, and came up and said there was no hope. And there was ghost stories at the time, the year after, about the restless dead, figures seen walking around, patrolling the woods in this very dramatic, the Hoosac Tunnel is tucked into these two sort of mountain ridges, so it's entirely in shadow. It is very spooky even in and of itself. And it's just a small kind of tunnel, not lit. It looks very unsettling. And the stories of this time were of these figures walking in the snow without footprints, because they were specters, and they were hearing moaning. Workers were hearing moans from within the tunnel. Workers were hearing, and locals were whose loved ones did not come back because of this explosion, and their bodies were not yet recovered. The lack of recovering of the bodies, and we find this a lot in ghost lore, where if the body is not recovered, there is additional propensity for ghost lore and sightings and things, because it's unfinished business. Yeah. No one can have closure in that case. Yeah. And so these striking workers, there had been a workers' strike just prior to this explosion happening. The workers were trying to tell people, this is a dangerous thing. We need better protections. We need another way out. If one shaft fills up, we need another way out. So, and all of these various things, the safety precautions and requested, were denied. They were forced back onto the work line or lose their job at a time when jobs were very hard to come by in that particular area. So this was, there was this sort of, work or die mentality. Yeah. And at this point they were literally crushed in this venture. And it's for me, what's so interesting about this particular story is that the ghost lore, the more modern ghost lore about it, is actually where these people who died in the tunnel, or the imprint of, I'm not sure if it's what was known as an intelligent haunting, which is something that's really interactive with the living, or if it is more of a what would be known as a residual haunting, which is like a psychic imprint of stuff. Well, I think sometimes workers who are modern living workers who are working there end up interacting with intelligent hauntings, because we've got a great story from the 1970s, and it's one that was carried in a couple of different papers at the time, and then it's been reprinted in a bunch of different ghost lore books through the years since then. A worker known as Joseph Impoco, who wrote to his local paper that he had been working on a line, and he, for whatever reason, didn't realize that there was a train coming, and he heard a voice, a disembodied voice. He hadn't seen anyone else in the tunnel at the time. He felt he was the only one working the track at that moment.
Yeah.
And he heard a voice say, "Run, Joe, run."
Holy shit.
And it was really insistent, and he did. He just didn't question it. You hear a voice and run, and you do. And thank God he did, because a train came around the corner that he just hadn't heard. And the acoustics of that area are really weird and wild.
Okay.
So sometimes you'll be hearing, rumbling, and you don't know if it's the mountain, you don't know if it's the wind, you don't know if it's the tracks. So there's a lot of things that you can misinterpret there. And again, if it's coming around the bend, you don't always hear the sound of things coming, because the stuff curves around the tracks. And so he didn't question that, because then he got another directive maybe about a year later or so. It was some time had passed, and he heard a voice go, "Drop it, Joe, drop it." And he was holding a crowbar at the time.
Yeah.
And he dropped the crowbar, and as he dropped it, a enormous like hundreds of voltage jolt from a failing power line zaps the crowbar.
Holy shit.
That had he been holding, he would have been absolutely killed by that amount of voltage. No way he'd have survived it. And he would go back even after he retired from that job, he would go back every year to that place to kind of thank the ghost, basically, to like feel like he was paying kind of homage to these voices that had saved him. And he had seen, but on one of the two cases, he had seen a worker in kind of like faded sort of overalls. It looked a little dated. He was carrying a torch, and he thought it was just some other worker who just looked a little antiquated, just had a little, he just didn't really think about it. And then later, as he was thinking about it after the voice he'd heard, he'd seen this figure walk by. He didn't see the figure when he heard the voice, but he thought about that figure, and he's like, I wonder if that's one of the guys that had been a part of any of these accidents before. He was very, very sure they saved his life. And, I love nothing more than a helpful ghost. Because they were looking out for their fellow worker, because you know what? If you don't look out for your fellow worker, who will?
Heck yeah. Like I tell you, the conversations I have with you, I end up thinking just unique thoughts. And I'm like, the idea of solidarity here, like
really across the veil solidarity. I'm a member of 3 unions, and it means a lot to me to hear stories like that.
I have enough of a time in my day to day making sure everybody signs their union card amongst the living. My goodness, I don't want to.
Right. Right.
Everybody sign your union card now.
Right, for real. And Joe himself would have been a part of a union, but not the men in the 19th century. That was not allowed to be formed yet. They were working on it. 19th century labor law was an active concern. Folks were trying, and some were able to unionize across a bunch of different trades in the 19th century, but it was a constant battle.
Yeah. There's early labor, of course, having a very clandestine feel to it, that the idea if workers would come together, that they would create a natural barrier on the movement of capitalism by raising labor costs, etc. But always clandestine. It even still has a little bit of a feel to that. No, it's such a beautiful.
Well, we're still seeing that stuff today, where union busting efforts are happening all over the place, where folks are trying to meet and trying to get to talk with one another, and they're being forbidden, whether it's on warehouse floors or in coffee shops or whatever.
Yeah, talking
Still,
about
this is still happening.
and talking about the in the private sector. And what you had talked about when we talked last time, talking about the labor law that had come
Hmm.
into the fore in the in the 1930s, formally under under federal law, still kind of a new thing. But the dynamics that you and I talk about, there's some of the same dynamics going on, right? Like the boss is breathing down my neck. We're supposed to have the ability, the two of us, to talk about combining our resources and our labor together, and demanding what we need, say, to live, and health insurance and all that stuff. So
Well,
active,
and
active. I
labor law,
agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
and child labor has been completely undermined in many states now. And this was starting to happen right as we were publishing the first book, and the youngest victims in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire were 14 years old, and we're seeing kids, teenagers, and younger working in plants now because child labor has been repealed in many places, and
These are
these are dangerous jobs, and that's no place for kid.
Yeah,
Let kids be kids.
I mean, what is there to be surprised about? But I think, I remember back in 2011, being in Madison, Wisconsin, and part of my local being part of the resistance against Scott Walker, and kind of
Oh yeah,
austerity place there. But
oh yeah.
it was the whole package. You know this stuff. It was the whole package. It wasn't just like an attack, a frontal attack on workers at the time. It was like everything that else that came along. It was like public works projects that would provide jobs. It was child labor, opening
Mhm.
up for child labor, right? This, like, almost it felt when it first came out like this kind of super antiquated babe. Like, come on, I thought we were past kids working. No, no, like they had kind of refangled this and say, hey, these kids are good. It teaches good skills and stuff. 14, 15 years old, or even younger. These are in semi-legitimate considerations that we're
Mhm.
talking about, not even the illegitimate ones where the kids aren't on the books or whatever's going on there. So I tell you, yeah, one of the pieces, as far as the work that you do, and in talking about this, is that for me it helps me mentally, because it feels like there's while things are the same, or feel the same, and the dynamics can feel the same, there's always like this kind of constant re-engagement. Like, workers will figure out how to fucking
Mhm.
organize if there are
Mhm.
structures that says they can't. They'll find out where to organize. And
Mhm.
so it's overbearing. Like the maybe it's like the dread of the whole thing feels overbearing, but uh, there's these sparks that always keep you going, that the humans are thinking more creatively than they have in the past.
Absolutely. That's yeah, and we don't like there's no in our work it's not one note. It's never hopeless. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in telling these stories because I think they are providing hope, and they're illuminating, and they're also saying, "Hey, let's try to keep doing better." And and I'm not saying that like kids can't have summer jobs or whatever. But 9-year-olds, if they're in an unsafe plant, that where the safety laws have also been undermined, that's the stuff I'm concerned about. I don't want a kid working in a plant to lose their fingers or their hand or
Mhm.
something like that, and these things have happened. This is a dangerous environment, and if some kids want to work there because they want to have those skills and various other things, that's fine, as long as there's not a coercive situation, and as long as it is safe. The problem of it is that a lot of these places, part and parcel, it's if your safety isn't there, then you're putting kids who don't necessarily always have as much of a literal physical strength to stop something unsafe from
Yeah,
happening.
yeah.
And they don't always know when they can and can't say no about a given situation that they don't feel safe in.
Well, and
So
and
it's
on
not that
this,
I'm anti
yeah.
giving people skills. I just want people to be able to be in safe environments in it. When I also want kids to be safe in school too. So that's another
Yeah,
story.
no, and this, absolutely, and I think the biggest piece about it that I've seen is those incentives and drives, right, which don't take into account, the age, or it's just grist for the mill, and that dynamic still still stands. But the thing is too, what's a kid like? I'm an adult and I'm around adults when there's a safety situation, and I can tell you the general dynamics. Nah, it ain't that bad. And I mean, there's something about us where it's like, it's just part of the job and stuff. And when you're talking about, I feel when that stuff comes up on a strike, or there's so much, that shit's gonna collapse. That thing's gonna cut off somebody's arm. That thing keeps going down. The machine keeps going down, and when we put it back up, I think it's gonna blow. And they'll keep saying, and so I think it's like one of the things of like when we're talking about safety and we're talking about work. If one thing I say, just like let's listen to each other, and let's not have it be where we go back and calculate if this would have happened, if this would have happened, if this would have happened.
Yeah. Yeah, listen to your instincts too. I mean, there's some really interesting parts of of the ghost lore stuff where it's like this uncanny moment where you're not sure what you're hearing or what you're feeling or what you're seeing, but something isn't right. And that is your instinct kicking in. And we know that instinct was developed in our brains to try to keep us safe. And again, I'm not saying anybody needs to be paranoid about stuff, but I do think folks should listen to their gut if they feel like they're in an unsafe environment.
Yeah. So Leanna and I believe that when you go to work, you should come back alive to measure your ability.
I do. Well, otherwise I'm going to have to write about you in a next book. And it's like in due time, like,
this certain personality is going to haunt the shit, whether there's a scientific, haunt the shit out of people.
I'm going to make an amazing ghost. I'll still have a lot to say.
I am
a literal
sure.
ghostwriter.
Well, there's one thing I still want to do when I get out east is to take one of your tours, because this has been great to talk with you. But I mean, I think your skills, as an historian, as an actor, as a storyteller, and I think that's in doing the show. What's a podcast that kind of keeps you listening? Just the stories, the human stories. And so I just really appreciate your talents and like I said, when I get out that way, I want to take one of those
Burrows of the Dead. Look up burrowsofthedead.com. So if you are in New York City, Burrows of the Dead, and that is Burrows as in the New York 5 boroughs. So that is BOUR. And so, Burrows of the Dead is the company I work for, and it is founded by Andrea Janes, who is my co-author for all my nonfiction. And I love being a tour guide. I can also assure you that every single guide that Andrea has hired is really stellar. So if you get me on a tour, fantastic. To tell you the truth, I'm not doing very many tours this fall because I'm going to be on the road promoting our book. Andrea is going to be kind of holding down the fort in New York City, making sure the tour company keeps running. I'll be giving you a few tours. We've got a new one coming out called the Uncanny Upper West Side, and I'm really excited about that one because I love the Upper West Side. And then I get to talk about my Dakota Building chapter, which is beautiful apartment building, and it's a treasure trove of these of hauntings within this larger space, which is really interesting. So that's a new tour that we're launching this fall. So I hope folks will take that and any of our classic tours. A great deal of New York City is covered. So there's a part of the city that you're curious about. A lot of our attendees are also just locals, East Coast locals who are like, all right, I'm curious about seeing my city in a different way. Yeah. And of course we welcome folks from all over. So let's check out burrowsofthedead.com.
I love it, and thank you so much for your time and for putting out this new book, kicking off our spooky season now, spooky episodes all the way through Halloween. But man, Leanna, I just learned so much from you talking to you and thinking about these things. So really appreciate it. For all my folks, I'm originally from Rhode Island. All my folks, family, friends out there, you heard some of the places Leanna's going to be in Massachusetts. I know a ton of people in Massachusetts, over there in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. Heartleaf. My Providence people, come see me at Heartleaf Books on October 3rd. From 5 to 7, I'll be there with a great Rhode Island author, Krista Carmen. We're going to be selling our new books there. We're going to be signing. We're going to be meeting and greeting with people. Heartleaf Books is an incredible Providence independent bookstore. We love it. It's a co-op bookstore. So good. If you've never been to Heartleaf, please go. And then I'm going to be at the Ashaway Library, which is also in Rhode Island. The Ashaway Library on October 5th at 2 p.m., also in conversation with author Krista Carmen about our latest work. And that is a free event. And they're going to have like refreshments. It's going to be really fun, atmospheric there. So yeah, that's for the Rhode Island folks. For the Massachusetts folks, I'll be signing at Wicked Good Books in Salem.
Wicked good. It's
Wicked Good Books. It's such a great sort of double entendre there. I'll be there at Salem, in the heart of Salem. And if you're from Massachusetts, you know that you probably shouldn't go to Salem in October. But
I did that once. And once only. Tried to do that once and once only.
I'm lucky that I have family in the area, because otherwise, so logistically, if you're up for it, I will have signed books at Wicked Good Books I'll be there on October 6th. I'll also be going back to October 2nd, All She Wrote books on October 2nd. That's in Somerville. So my Boston peeps, come see me on October 2nd at 7 p.m. at All She Wrote books in Somerville, Mass. That's another great independent bookstore that I just adore. Has been a wonderful partner through the years. So
thank you.
So yeah, that's my
bookstores. I love it. We have our local bookstore, Browser's Bookstore, a couple blocks from us, bringing up a lot on the show.
Oh, good. I'm sure they'll have copies. Order in through them. So
Abe is, if you're in Albany, Oregon, and you want something rather than nothing authors, there's only one spot to go, and that's Browser.
So exciting.
Great. Have a great time. Good luck with the tour, and everybody grab this book. Listen to audiobook. The last one, I want to make sure. Last one was an audiobook. It had an audio.
It was. Yeah. And now we did not narrate that one. That was a wonderful narrator. We loved her. Her name is Linda Jones.
It was very good narrator. Yeah.
She's very, very good. For this one, because this one is more personal and really has some of our own personal experiences, it made a lot more sense for us to be the ones reading it, because there's just some deep stuff in there that's really coming from our own experiences. So the Tantor team agreed, like, yeah, no, let's have you guys do this. And so I went into this soundproof room in Manhattan, which is the funniest thing, that, like, it's just no sound gets into this place. It's incredible. I felt like I was in a hermetically sealed space, and this really high-end equipment, everything. It was really cool. So that should be out simultaneously with the book. So you should be able to, you are able to pre-order that, so it'll arrive on your devices release day.
Yeah, everybody listen to this, pre-order, connect
so
with
good. It's so helpful
that first week, and want to thank you finally, Leanna, for coming back on, talking books, talking history. I've learned a lot. So I've learned a lot by the end of, like, here, just sitting around on a Sunday, and even inspired on the labor thing, that there's labor solidarity beyond the living and breathing. I've done this work for a while, but you've reinforced it again, that solidarity, like, truly, like, solidarity forever.
I'm literally solidarity forever, literally and metaphysically. So on that note,
we'll catch you on the flip side. Good luck. Safe travels.
Thank you. I appreciate you all.
Take care.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.
And listeners, to stay connected with us and our guests, visit somethingratherthannothing.com. Join our mailing list for exclusive updates and access to guest-created art. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast platform. People really read that shit. Your support helps us reach more listeners and spread our community across the planet. This is a global show, and we like to give a shout out to our many listeners across the world, including many listeners in Canada, Spain, Germany, UK, Argentina, Brazil, India, Thailand, and so many more places. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, at Something Rather Than Nothing podcast for behind the scenes content. And the best way to help the show is to tell your friends about us. If you love it, they'll love it too. Tell your friends who love it. We love you. This is Something Rather Than Nothing podcast.